All right, we're back for another episode of Riders Talking. And as you've probably noticed, this is going to be an off camera show because the simple reason of myself and my guest's dashing good looks combined were too much for the cameras. No, kidding. My guest doesn't have a camera on his computer because he's a smart man, unlike myself. He is the author of the Darklands Online series, the guy who accidentally started the apocalypse, and McBride's Magical Munchies, which is a fantastic title in itself. Please welcome Mr. David J. Bushman to the show.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
It's great to have you on here. All right. So I always like to start at the beginning of any writing journey of my guests.
Okay.
So for me, I started writing stories when I'd stay at my grandparents' house on the weekends or school holidays. And my gran and my auntie, who was their carer, they like to watch I kind of think of it as the Green Mile of British soap operas. And it was around about 2 hours of hell for me, and I couldn't sit still and keep quiet. And one day my auntie gave me a pad and a pen and said, "Look, shut up and write a story or something." And that was how it got started for me. How did it go for you?
Um, I never really had a formal start. I've always enjoyed stories, whether
Mhm.
it's television or books or comic books. I honestly, comic books are probably how I got into reading originally.
What comic books?
Uh, Spider-Man and Batman were my favorites, but
Hmm.
I've read so many. I feel like a lot of people have started with those two. They're two of the bigger mainstream books.
Oh yeah.
But as far as writing goes, I've always enjoyed stories and telling stories. Um, I remember uh, being back in high school, that being one of my favorite things to do in our language arts classes are were the more creative
Hmm.
aspects. Uh, and I guess that's probably where I got my start.
Mm. Yeah, I to this day I still love collecting a lot of the old school Marvel comics,
Okay.
and a lot of my collection is the old school Spider-Man, uh,
Ah,
particularly the ones illustrated by Todd McFarlane.
okay.
And
Yeah.
I think probably my prized possession is probably the most valuable comic I've got in my collection is Amazing Spider-Man 300, which is the first full appearance of Venom.
Ah, yes.
And obviously, with the movies that have come out, I mean, one was good, the other two, number two was terrible, and I haven't seen number three, but they've bumped up the value quite nicely for me.
I'm sure.
Mm. Was it just comics that were your influences, or did you have anything else?
Well, what starting out, I wasn't a big reader
Mm-hmm.
until late elementary school. I started going to the local drugstore, and they sold comic books there. And I started picking those up, and I became a stronger reader because of it.
Mm.
And then by the time I got into sixth or seventh grade, I moved on to more novels and still sticking with comic books.
Mm-hmm.
But um, I guess becoming a stronger reader uh, allowed me to branch out more. So I started reading, like Clive Cussler
Mm.
and Michael Crichton and
Mm-hmm.
Dean Koontz.
Ah, now Dean Koontz was one of my favorites
Ah, okay,
because I remember in secondary school I read Twilight Eyes,
okay.
and then loads like Watchers and Hideaway, and yeah, those books are fantastic. But it's been a long time since I've seen any of his works. I don't even know if he still writes these days. Does he?
I'm not sure. He's one I haven't followed as much. Um, Michael Crichton was probably my favorite.
May he rest in peace.
Yes, and that was tragic.
Hmm.
Um, but those were the authors like I kind of started out with when I started reading more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's odd because I skipped, I feel like, a whole section of reading. I went straight from comic books to adult novels. Like I never did the middle grades or young adult stuff. I went into big sci-fi tomes as soon as I got into reading.
Hmm.
So some of the I guess some of my inspiration I draw from that.
Did you ever draw any inspiration from movies growing up?
Yeah, I don't know that I've written a lot that reflects on movies. More of my book projects have reflected on um, video games,
Hmm.
but I've watched a ton of movies. I love good science fiction,
Yeah.
something like Event Horizon
Oh, it's a
or
classic.
um, Dark City,
Dark City is
Gattaca.
also a massive classic, but Dark City is one of those ones that was meddled with by the studios. And when I finally saw the director's cut of it, it was like, wow, this is so much better.
Yes, and I enjoy big budget movies like growing up the Indiana Jones trilogy was one of my favorites.
Yeah, because there's only three Indiana Jones films. I'm not going to even acknowledge the other two.
um, you know, even stuff that isn't necessarily a classic, but like I can watch a Transformers movie. It's a big budget summer franchise,
Yeah,
but I'm not watching it because of its a depth of story. It's a spectacle.
yeah, of course. The
And
only downside for me with the Transformers movies is they got successively worse.
yeah.
I mean, I don't get me wrong. I remember watching the first Michael Bay one in the cinema with my kiddie glasses on and just giggling silly at the fact that there was my childhood on the screen again. But then you got Revenge of the Fallen, which was awful. Um, what was it? Right, the Dark Moon, whatever the third one was called, which
Dark
was
Side of the Moon, I
that's
think.
it, yeah, which was okay, and then the other two, which were absolutely awful. And then you've got Transformers One, which I'm told is okay, but because was such a financial failure, obviously it's led to this thing with Hasbro not wanting to co-finance their works anymore, which is
Right.
like that's a real shame
Yeah.
because obviously Transformers was a big part of my life growing up.
Absolutely. And so many people around our age, Transform was highly influential.
Absolutely.
And there's parts in my current writing where I think about the big robots of Transformers when I'm describing how something's happening.
Hmm.
It's kind of hard science fiction wise not to reference something like that because the visual aspect of those movies is still great, even if the story was lacking or the characters were lacking. There's still the spectacle of it.
Yeah. So you've mentioned video games as well. I'm curious as to what video games played a part in your influences.
Well, it just depends on the book. If we look at Darklands Online,
Hmm.
it is a very massive multiplayer online type of game book. So games like World of Warcraft and Guild Wars were heavily influenced in how I set things up, the world itself,
Yeah.
and some of the set pieces were reminiscent of different dungeon set pieces from, say, World of Warcraft.
Hmm.
Um, there's one boss in particular. I want to say it's in the fourth book where they're fighting a giant capybara, and it is similar to the core hounds and
Hmm.
molten core of World of Warcraft
Yeah.
because I took some inspiration from that.
So it sounds to me like you're a PC gamer.
I am. I've also been a big Nintendo gamer over the
Mm,
years. I kind of between Nintendo and PC. I've owned some PlayStations. My
yeah.
son plays Xbox, so we've had them all around. Um, but I would say I most of my gaming I've done on the PC. And likewise, my inspirations for the guy that accidentally started the apocalypse are first-person shooters that I've
Yeah.
played on PC, like Apex Legends and Titanfall
Oh, yeah.
and those kind of games.
Yeah, I absolutely loved the Titanfall games when they came out, especially the second. But I was one of the early purchasers of the Xbox One,
Okay.
and it was a funny old time because they didn't have that much out for it game wise, and we were often sat there waiting for a new one to come out. And when they finally released Titanfall, it was such a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm. So, when it comes to your writing, are you a guy that outlines, or are you a guy that, as other authors famously say, is a pantser?
I am all over the place when it comes to that.
Mm.
When I look at Darklands Online, I had maybe a page of outline for each book.
Hmm.
Not very much outlining at all. I had here are the main points I want to hit as we go, and most of it was shooting from the hip.
Yeah.
Now, if we go all the way to McBride's Magical Munchies, which were my more recent stories,
Yep.
those are I'm not going to say extensively outlined. I've never been a heavy outliner, but each chapter in that has probably 5 bullet points of, okay, I want to hit this, I want to hit this, I want to hit this. Now, whether I hold closely to that, some more so than others,
Hmm.
but there's definitely outlining being done with those. And it's just, there's nothing in particular that makes me outline or not outline. It's just kind of how a project ends up coming about. It almost happens organically.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't done a lot of outlining on the book I'm working now on
Hmm.
now. I've done more of the here are the main beats I want to hit throughout, and it's not a deep outline.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the book, I suppose.
I like to outline, but I also don't like to outline too heavy. I like to leave myself a little room to play, if you know what I mean. So,
Absolutely.
so that if a particular idea for a scene comes along, I mean, a good example of this is Crescendo Station One. Um, I won't say the scene online for anyone who hasn't read it, but as I was about to finish the chapter, I thought, no way, wouldn't they have done this? So I rewrote the end and added a whole new sort of section to this scene, which made the chapter much, much better. Uh, so yeah, I do like to outline, but I like to say that little wiggle room to play is often very helpful to me personally. And the one time I wrote a book without an outline, I like it. Don't get me wrong, but it's one of my shortest, and I kind of wince a little bit when I think about that because I really kind of wish I'd done better with it. But well, this whole thing's part of a learning process, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Um, I find a lot of times when I outline, if I get too specific in what I'm doing,
Yeah.
I end up going well off the rails.
Oh yeah,
I
absolutely.
I have a scene unfold and it takes a direction.
Mm.
Maybe the dialogue, somebody has a certain attitude, and then I go back and look at my outline, like, well, they can't get to there now
Mm.
because the characters have taken it this other direction, and uh, maybe there's some friction between characters that I hadn't originally anticipated, or maybe the situation's more dire than I initially suspected.
Yeah.
So I try to keep my outline simple in that regard.
Hmm.
Um, I don't I'm not married to 'em, I guess. So what I do is I try to just hit the high points. A
Yeah.
lot of times I'll have a scene in my head that maybe inspired the whole book, and I'm trying to get to there. But if it doesn't happen the way I originally anticipated it happening,
Hmm.
I I don't get bent out of shape about it.
So you don't mind happy accidents.
Absolutely not. That's all. It's all part of the creative process.
Mm. So this is probably a silly question to ask an author, but I like asking it to see the varying answers. how much of you personally makes it into your work? Because the project I'm working on right now was inspired by a lot of the, let's say, horrible emotions and my mind being the dark place that it was in the last couple of months, and then it just sort of exploded out from there. What about you?
Um, it varies. I know a lot of times my main characters will take on different aspects of my personality
Hmm.
because I it's the person I'm working on the most closely in any given book.
Yeah.
Um, but it varies. McBride's Magical Munchies, for example, all of the locations are based off of real life locations around where I live.
Yeah.
And it was something I kind of took inspiration from Tao Wong
Yeah.
with System Apocalypse. Now his are all Canadian, but they're all real world cities and territories and locations.
Hmm.
And I kind of thought when I was starting McBride's, like, well, that's a great way to do a setting because I've been to all these places. They exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
I only need to describe them.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of fun because I could be like, well, where are we going next? And I could literally pull up a map and be like, okay, well, oh, well, there's this town over here. What could be happening over there?
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. So that's a very close to uh, my personal life uh, example, I should say.
Yeah.
And Darklands Online, it's very different. Obviously, it's not real world locations. It's in a video game that book takes place.
Hmm.
But a lot of the people in it, a lot of the gamer tags you see are people either friends of mine or people I gamed with online,
Oh,
and
cool.
it's just kind of a nod to people. And that series itself started out as almost like a love letter to that time of gaming I had when I was really into the massive multiplayer games.
Yeah.
People I was friends with on there,
Hmm.
they've got spots in the books, and I've had them pick up the books later, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize you put my character in there." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And so I that's another, I guess, personal touch that crept into my writing or inspired
Yeah.
my writing.
I remember in my first book, which I wrote, which it was thinking back now, it was terrible, but it was I was happy with it at the time. One of the characters in it, I based on a former supervisor of mine, and in the book, I blew him up. And when he learned of this, he went, "Well, it's the only way you could get rid of me," which I always chuckle when I think about. But yeah, that was, oh man, my first book was terrible. Ugh. I don't like to think about it now, except for the fact that it was a learning process. But you know, we must continue forward from such works, I guess.
Right.
One question I've never asked before, I really should have done thinking about it, was do you listen to any music or anything when you're working? Because my particular favorite is film soundtracks. I listen to ones such as Aliens, Terminator 2, The Rock, Terminator. Is there anything like that you use?
I absolutely do. I have music on quite often when I'm editing and when I'm uh, writing. Now it varies. A lot of times when I'm editing, I'll play classical music
Yeah.
or I like piano, something calming
Hmm.
because when I'm editing, it's a very meticulous process.
Yeah.
So I want noise, but I want it to be soothing. Um, when I have a book like The Guy Who Accidentally Started the Apocalypse,
Hmm.
there are a lot of musical references in that book. The
Hmm.
running gag with Paulie taking over Cameron's smart speaker on his frame. It oftentimes I have music I'm playing. I'm like, oh, I'm going to work this song in. I
Yeah.
like this song. So there's a lot of song references because I like to listen to music and it just kind of keeps my my mind moving as I'm writing. It gives me something else to focus on instead of getting bogged down in what I'm doing.
Hmm. So, I'm going to discuss the works now.
Okay.
And of course, as you've mentioned it, we'll start with, of course, Darklands Online. Oh, I've gone to the wrong bloody one. Of course I have. Let's try that again. Take two. Da, 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 da. Is it this one? Yes. There we go. Book one.
It's a good place to start.
Yes. Right. So first thing, I don't usually mention these straight away, but the first thing I mention is the covers,
Yes,
because you had the covers redone, didn't you?
I did. And there's a very good reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
The first covers I did for the first three books, I was using someone from Fiverr,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't bad covers. They weren't quite what I wanted, but
Okay.
they were what I could afford.
Yeah.
Because when I started this whole thing, I had no budget, and subsequently, every cover became a little bit more expensive because her
Yeah.
prices just kept going up.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to the fourth book, I approached Stephen Landry, who you know,
Oh, yes.
author, but he also does quite a bit of graphics work, and he does a lot of typography for different people.
He does some excellent work, doesn't he?
Yes, and I was like, you know what? If I'm paying this money to have this done, I want to pay it to somebody I know,
Yeah.
somebody that I've worked with, and like I said, this person kept raising the prices on me. I didn't feel like I was getting value for what I was paying by the time book four rolled around.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of back and forth with Steve, and I'm like, I just want to keep it in the same vein so it all feels like the same series.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to talking about it. He's like, I can do that. And he actually worked a proof up of what would have been the cover. He's like, but what about something like this? And that's where we got an early version of what book one looks like. And I'm like, well, that's amazing. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I could be very proud of for a book. But it looks nothing like what I have. He's like, how about we redo them all? And I'm like, I don't necessarily have the money to do that. And he cut me a sweetheart deal, is what it comes down to, because he believed in the project. He wanted the project to be of a certain level, and I was grateful for that. And
Yeah.
we worked it out, and that's why we recovered all four of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been very happy with them.
Oh, yeah, they're wonderful covers, and a shout out to Stephen Landry for such excellent work. And for anyone that's looking for a good cover, I'd heartily recommend him because I think they're brilliant.
Absolutely.
So, to get to the book itself, how did the story come about? What was the genesis of it?
Well, it's kind of funny because at first, before this book came about, I never really read a lit RPG.
Mm-hmm.
I um, read a lot of sci-fi. Sci-fi is probably still my one of my big go-to genres. And a friend of mine, Derek, who, if you're in the lit RPG community, you've seen him around. He reads everything, talks about books all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He got me started on lit RPGs. Like, you need to try this genre. You love games. You love reading.
Yeah.
Try try The Land, Chaos Seeds by Ron Kong.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading it, and I just I was like seeing the depth of it and that kind of thing. I was just like, I could do this. I
Mm-hmm.
could write this book. And it kind of something clicked in my head at that as I'm reading it, saying, why don't I take a shot at writing one?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the first Darklands Online came up. I was reading that book, and I became inspired to give my own go of it.
Yeah. So the story in particular, the part that intrigues me, I'm trying to do this without giving away spoilers too much because I want people to get into the series, is
Absolutely.
how the character gets his main power and how he discovers it near the beginning of the book. it does make me think that he's found an Easter egg in the game. Am I on the right path there?
Yes, yes. There's a part of the inspiration for this is uh, the series Sword Art Online, which is a manga anime.
Yeah, I know it.
Okay. And what I always liked about that series is there was always a this is the meta, this is how people are supposed to do things. Uh, this is the prescribed path through this game because you see it in every game. Well, this is the best way to do it, so this is how you should focus. And when you have that, it's saying ignore everything else.
Yeah,
And I've always said, well, wouldn't it be cool if somebody's playing the game, they see all that, but they just want to kind of forge their own path, and they actually find a very successful way of doing so.
hmm.
And that's kind of what Kurt does in this. His brother's with him saying, "Okay, well here's what the guide says. Here's what popular opinion is."
Yeah,
He's like, "Well, I just want to uh, do it my own way," and he ends up finding a very effective way of playing Darklands online,
yeah,
and it ends up opening up into this bigger story of not everything is what it seems, and uh, from there he ends up getting some very unique abilities that set him apart.
yeah, and also get a lot of unwanted attention.
Yes, some just, some very unjust
Hmm.
attention. Uh, but that was part of my inspiration. And then the other thing I've always liked is um, the game itself is your real world skills translate into the game.
Yeah.
And that I feel like is his second edge
Hmm.
because of his wrestling background, his athletics background,
Yeah.
and he brings that with him. So he's um, not your typical player of the game.
No. Now, obviously, I'm focusing on the audio books
Yes.
because for books 1 to 3, you had the dual narration team of
Yes.
David Raymer and Jessica Wyman. Uh, I like the dual narration approach. I think I talked about this with Edie Sky because, as much as I don't mind a single narrator, one thing I found is that men can't necessarily do a woman's voice particularly convincingly, and vice versa with women doing some men's voices. Uh, how did the arrangement come about with this? Because obviously, us indies, we don't have the same sort of cash and necessarily, um, how do I put this, pull to get the sort of narration teams that we can only dream of.
Yes. I lucked out in that regard. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to do audio originally,
Mm,
but it was something that's very popular in the genre.
yeah.
So I wanted to give it a go, and I set up a audition piece and went through all the work on ACX
Yeah.
and fielded a number of auditions. And that's how I met David. And originally it was just David.
Yeah.
And I got to talking to him a little bit because he made my short list very quickly. He's very good.
Yeah.
And he said, "You know what? I know somebody that's looking to get into narrating audiobooks. She's a theater major and some other things. Let me talk to her and see if maybe we could do dual narration. Is that something you'd be interested?" And of course I was, because there is an authenticity with having a female narrator for the female voices and a male narrator for the male voices.
Yeah.
And we were able to set it up, and it worked out brilliantly for the first 3 books,
Hmm.
and I was very happy with it.
Yeah.
And we were able to keep it affordable, and it was an opportunity that I was glad fell to me.
Hmm.
I I I really, especially being my first series,
Yeah,
it was very good to have that.
because obviously narrated you changed the narrating team for book 4, which was of course the final of the series, to Mr. Brad Derry. Now,
Yes,
I would have been very weary about doing that because I'm wondering if people would have been thrown by the change. Was that something that you worried about?
it is. What it came down to is after book 3, um, David was actually retiring from audio narration,
Yeah,
and I tried very hard to get them to finish the series out, but it wasn't audiobook narration wasn't financially something he could do anymore.
yeah,
And unfortunately, it came down to, okay, do we do a narrator switch, or do we just not complete the series in audio and only
mm,
complete it in text? There's drawbacks to both. Um, out of that series, book 4 is the least successful audio wise.
that's a shame.
It is, but a lot of people are against narrator changes. Unfortunately, you know as well as I do, audiobook narration is a pricey affair.
Yeah, um,
And,
I'll tell my story, mate. You carry
oh,
on.
okay. And I I had to put it out there. I was like, okay, I need somebody to finish this series, and I don't have a lot of funds because it's book 4 in a series. The further you get in the series, there's diminishing returns
Yeah,
naturally. And I met up with Brad, and he was willing to finish it out and help me get something out there, so at least those who have been loyal throughout the series could have something to finish on. I mean,
mm,
it was never going to be the same as the first 3 books, but for the people that do enjoy listening to it, I wanted them to be able to finish the story.
yeah,
And I was really happy with what Brad did,
yeah. You did a good job.
and I only wish we could have somehow kept it all together for one last book, but it just wasn't in the cards, unfortunately.
Yeah, I had a narrator who wanted to do a book with me, but the previous one in the series had done okay, but he wanted a financial incentive paid up front to keep him on.
Yes.
And I kind of thought, you cheeky sod, because he made a lot of mistakes reading it, which was there were some very random ones, and it made the editing of the audiobook such a ball ache to get through. Which I mean, thinking about it now, I suppose I got off lucky, but I only that was a short series. Yours was obviously much longer, but
Right.
I I always like to, if I can, sort of focus on a particular part of a book that's really grabs my attention, because nowadays there aren't many moments in a book where I'll just sort of pause and sort of go, "Oh, what the hell," as I'm listening. And you got me with one such moment. I'm not going to tell you what it is on here, but it was at the end of book 3,
Okay.
and I'm literally frozen as I'm listening to it, going, "Oh, he didn't just do that." And I remember clearly messaging you saying, "What the hell, dude?" And you
Yeah.
obviously you knew what I was talking about,
Yep.
because that scene at the end of book 3 led to what I can only describe as a very moving but very haunting scene near the end of book 4. And obviously, again, I'm being deliberately vague because I don't want to spoil it for anyone that's listening.
Right.
But holy shit, dude, you really hooked me on that moment.
Well, thank you. Um,
What was it like writing that scene in book 4?
Without getting into too much detail between book 3 and book 4,
Yep.
the story is when I started this, outside of the, um, hey, I can do this genre. I had very early on this idea because the story is ultimately a story of 2 brothers.
Yep.
And originally it was mapped out to be a 5-book series. for
Mm.
financial reasons, book 4 and 5 kind of got pressed together into book 4.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm gonna make this 4 books instead of 5 because there's just finances, unfortunately, sometimes play a role in it.
Yep.
And book 3, if you're looking at a 5-book arc, book 3 is kind of the climax. And
Hmm.
what you're referring to at the end of book 3 is the climax of the series. This event happens and it kind of changes everything.
Yeah.
And I always had this idea that that was going to happen, and we take the steps of where we end up at the end of book 4, which was originally going to be the end of book 5.
Hmm.
But it's very much a we're blending now what is real and what is not real.
Yeah.
And because your definition of real is, well, okay, this is a video game world. You're logging into a video game to play a game, but this other stuff has happened. And now how fake is it? How unreal is it?
Mm.
And for Kurt, our uh, main character, it's still very much a game that he logs in and out of. But for some of the other people we've met along the way, the stakes are a little different.
Yeah.
And how it ends at the very end, it, it's kind of the wrap up of that.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember where I was when I hit the end of book 3. I think I was at home, and I remember just stopping everything when I heard it. And book 4, when it reached that scene, I was traveling from a shopping center to home, and literally I was hoping the journey would slow down so I could squeeze that part out. But yeah, that was one scene that I remember really just grabbed me, because to go from that to the haunting scene itself, again, I'm being deliberately vague, but
Understandable. Yep.
yeah, man, that's one of the few times that a book has grabbed me like that. So absolute kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, and then we get to what I think is probably my favorite lit RPG book, if we can call it that to start with, and that is, of course, the guy who accidentally started the apocalypse. Now, I say call it lit RPG to begin with because, as we've talked about, and as it says on the cover, obviously, this is a lit FPS, isn't it?
Yes.
So how'd this one come about?
Uh, this is me bucking the trend a little bit. I
Hmm.
after I did Darklands Online, I said, you know what? So many of these books in the genre are the same,
Yeah.
and I seen a couple of different authors experiment with the first person shooter model,
Hmm.
and the general consensus is, oh, don't do it. It won't sell. And I'm not a big seller. I do this part time. I do it for the
Yeah,
art,
same.
for the release. It's my hobby, my recreation. But I just want to keep the ball rolling with my work. And I was like, I want to write the books I want to write. And
Yeah.
everybody's saying don't do this, but I think it's a fantastic idea.
Hmm.
It seems like the natural evolution of lit RPG is other genres of games, and what bigger genre is there than the first person shooter?
Yeah, of course.
And I love first person shooters. There's so
Yeah.
many I've played over
Oh
the
god,
years.
yeah. There's so many of them have been my bread and butter since I've been gaming. I mean, at the time we're talking now, I'm replaying Rage 2 on the PS5,
Okay.
and Rage 2 was one of those games that sadly didn't do very well, but the gunplay in it is fantastic.
Oh yeah. And I mean, there's so many different ways to go about it. And when that happened, when I made the decision that I wanted to do something that wasn't fantasy,
Hmm.
and I wanted to do something that was a shooter, both those ideas just they fit together so well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Um, so that was kind of the genesis of the guy who accidentally started the apocalypse.
Yeah. Because the story starts off so simply from a guy giving a coupon, I think it is, to a hobo in exchange for a bizarre little stone, and then he's in the future and the Earth's gone to shit, and he's fighting in a war against the aliens. It's it's a great bloody start to a book.
Eh, this was so much of this was tongue in cheek.
Yeah, but I didn't mind that. I thought,
No,
why the hell not?
again, this is me being inspired by anime again.
Yeah,
So many times, and even the title, we get these big, long titles. Uh, I died and I was reborn as a slime, and now I have to save the world, or something like
yeah,
that.
I've seen a few of those.
Yeah, and somebody gets hit by a truck and they're reborn in a new world. All these kind of, it doesn't really matter how we get there. We just want to get there.
Mm,
So I wanted to, with this book, I'm like, we're not going to spend a ton of time wading into how we get there. I want to drop right into it. So that first chapter, by the time we're there, we're in the thick of it.
mm,
And that's what I wanted it to be, because that was kind of the first person shooter feel. There's not a lot of lead up in first person shooters. It's
no,
typically you start out and within the first 5 minutes you're into the meat of it. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this.
yeah, I understand that totally. Um, it's also one of your biggest books, isn't it?
It is. And for better or for worse, when I got done with this, everybody was clamoring for longer books in lit RPG. They still are.
Yeah, I've had that. I've heard that said many times because when I wrote what is so far my only foray into the genre, which is of course Atara Station, it
Yes,
still is to my biggest book to this day. I'm hoping to beat that with this next one, but time will tell.
absolutely. And so when I set out to write this, I'm like, I'm going to write a big book. Like
Hmm.
that was my focus. It may be the last series of books quite this big.
Mm.
I like the 100,000 word mark for a book.
Oh yeah,
Now
so do I.
the first Darklands Online is smaller. It's about 74,000,
Yeah.
and I was told, oh, that's far too small.
Well, it's interesting you say that because um, I remember speaking with the author Nick Cole a long time ago because him and Jason Unspark wrote the Galaxy's Edge series,
Okay.
and those books are about 75,000 words long, I think. And their reasoning, if I remember this conversation right, it was a long time ago, was that because people are going through books so much and so quickly because of the digital age we're in now,
Yes.
that is a digestible size.
Yeah.
Is that not a bad thing to say?
No, I would agree with that. And in science fiction, a shorter book is very common.
Yeah.
If you look at a very popular series, the Murderbot Diaries,
Hmm.
they're all novella sized,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is far smaller than anything. Well, not anything I've done, but anything I'd had done to the point of this book.
Yeah.
And I was trying to take into account the readership where I'm bucking every other trend. This is me going back and saying, okay, well, let me try to get on the trend. So I was like, I'm going to write a big book. And it's
Hmm.
not nearly as big as some of the books in this genre.
No, some of them are huge.
Absolutely. There are some weighty tomes,
Yeah.
but I was like, this is gonna be my big book. So I think it ended up being like 147,000 words, which
That's
book two
brilliant.
is getting close to that.
That's brilliant.
But this will probably be the last trilogy I do where I'm doing these bigger books, because they are so not necessarily unwieldy, but there's a lot that goes into writing a book that big.
Mm. But not only do you have another fantastic cover from Stephen Landry,
Yes.
which I think is fucking awesome, this one, by the way. Uh, you have what I think is one of the best dual narration teams for the audiobook that I've ever heard. And I've got to be honest, I'm insanely jealous because Jessica 3 alone, I would absolutely die, and I mean die, to have her work on something of mine. So, how did this come about?
Well, this again is me lucking out by meeting Raymer.
Hmm.
After he couldn't do the work for me for Darklands Online Book 4, we were still in contact with each other because I originally wanted him to do this series as well. I
Yeah.
was very happy with him. And at this time, he was getting out of the game. And he said, I can't do it, but let me ask you if you would do this. Would you be willing if I financed it if we split the royalties? And I said, you know what? Absolutely. I,
Hmm.
I if you're willing to front the cost, and we can go out and hire the best team we can hire,
Mm.
let's do it. So we started putting our heads together, and we got turned down by a few people because I'm not a big name writer. It's
Mm.
just it's just the truth of the situation. Um, and we started looking, and we talked to Daniel, who I've always been a very big fan of Daniel,
Hmm.
and he works for Podium, I believe.
Oh, I
Is that
know
yes,
Podium. Yep.
yes. And at the time, he didn't think he was going to be able to do it, and he gave us a strong maybe, and it was better than anything we'd had to that point.
Yeah.
And some time goes by, we get a couple more rejections, and we're just getting to the point where I'm like, you know what? Maybe we put this on the shelf. I write the second book, so we have, a couple of them ready to go.
Yeah.
And he gets back to us. He's like, "Hey, my schedule opened up. I'm willing to do this. Do you guys still want dual narration?" And we said, "Oh yes, that'll be fantastic."
Hmm.
He's like, "Well, I got two people willing to work with me on this. We have Jessica Threet and Rebecca Woods." And to me, I'm like, that's an embarrassment of riches. Both
Hmm.
of those narrators are phenomenal, and Daniel's phenomenal. I've listened to him on a number of books,
Yeah.
and we listened to both, some test pieces for Rebecca and Jessica, and ultimately we went with Jessica, but I don't think we could have made a wrong choice there. And Jessica nailed it,
Oh God,
Daniel
yes.
nailed it, and it was honestly, I never dreamed I would have a book produced in that manner. Like it to me, it's my favorite audiobook. And nothing
Mm.
Jessica Wyman and David Raymer did. They did phenomenal on Darklands Online, but like the the work they put into this book, I am eternally grateful. It's something I'm very proud of. Just being able to say, "Hey, here's a piece of my work," and it's just it came to life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jessica Three on her own, I always laugh because when she's done that, what I call the infomercial speak, where she goes, like, just as an example, thank you for choosing such and such airlines. We hope you enjoy your flight. She can do that voice so well. I mean, I don't if you know what I mean.
Yes.
It's not the first audio book I've heard her do, but like I said, I would absolutely die to have her do something of mine. But this again, it's one of my favorite audiobooks that I've listened to, and so I say this as not only a fellow author but as a fan also. Hurry the fuck up with the second one, please.
It is getting there. It is. I've I kind of put myself in a corner by putting out 6 novellas last year.
Which we're
um,
about to get to.
yes, but I've never stopped working on it. I
Hmm.
I kind of had to do that just to stay fresh, to keep this one moving in the right direction.
Yeah,
And now we're getting to the point where I'm about to finish up that first draft, and then we're gonna just go through and we're gonna start polishing it, and
yeah,
we'll get the book out, and then we'll tackle the audio section of it. But yeah, it's so close. Like it's one of those things. The ends in sight. I got some points I got to hit. I got some things that have to happen, but it's right there.
yeah.
It's only a couple chapters left.
So as you've mentioned them, McBride's Magical Munchies, which, as I've said,
Yes.
is a fantastic title. But also, interestingly enough, we talk about big reads a minute ago. But yet here we are with 6 novellas. Now, which is a bit contradictory to the whole thing of the RPG readers liking a big book. So, how did these come about?
Well, this is me overcorrecting.
Okay.
um, financially, it hasn't been a huge success. I've the funny thing about McBride's is I've attracted more people outside of the genre than those inside of the genre with it,
Okay.
because a lot of people are willing to look at a 20 to 30,000 word book at a low price point to give it a shot.
Hmm.
And I've had a lot of people been like, "Wow, I've never read a Lair RPG before, but I really liked that."
Okay.
So I set out to write a big book with the guy that accidentally started the apocalypse, and I kind of wanted to shift gears. I'm like, I just want to do. I've always liked short stories. I'm in a couple of anthologies, and I was just like, I want to do something shorter, as opposed to being a movie. I want it to be a TV series.
Okay.
I want episodes. I want to be able to say, here's what's happening, and at the end of the episode everything gets tied up enough that you've had your half hour watch and you're ready to go about your day. So that's kind of the format I came up with McBride's. um it's another one is I wanted it to be less weighty,
Yeah.
more comical. I wanted almost a mix of Dungeon Crawler Carl and System Apocalypse.
Okay.
And I didn't want it to, like, yes, there are weighty stakes, but I wanted it to be something you can watch and it was, or read and it wasn't really heavy.
Yeah.
So that's it's just a change of gears, uh, trying to just stay fresh in writing by doing something different.
That's understandable. And I suppose it's a bit of a silly question, but I don't suppose we'll be seeing audiobooks of these, will we? Because the length just makes it not feasible.
Um, we won't be seeing individual audiobooks. I know some people have done that.
Hmm.
James Hunter and Eden Hudson have done it. Tao Wong's done it. I don't have the financial backing that they do to do the individual episodes. Now, that's not to say I might not get something out down the road, because I am planning on bundling them into omnibuses.
Okay.
So then I can treat the omnibus as a um, larger book.
Okay.
That's another project actually for this year. I got to find out exactly how many episodes, because I plan on releasing more episodes of it.
Yeah.
How many I want to bundle up? If I want to bundle all 6, if I want to bundle 4 of them, you know, just what's going to make sense publishing wise.
Mm.
And my hope is once I bundle them, maybe we get some more of the traditional lit RPG people to try it, because they'll say, "Oh, okay, well, it's of a length that we're used to seeing, and it's not." One thing we run into a lot in lit RPG is short books are seen as a cash grab, or even with the lower price point,
Yeah.
it's seen as not of as much of a value, for better or worse. That's just kind of how they're received. Um, I'm hoping once I bundle some of them up into an omnibus, that maybe people will be more willing to take a shot. And then I also want to put them on the omnibus on Kindle Unlimited. So
Okay.
those people that use that service, maybe we can expand the market of McBride's and uh, do more of them because of it.
Yeah. All right. So, aside from writing the sequel to Apocalypse and bundling McBride's Magical Munchies, what's next for you?
Okay. Well, for 2025, we're going to get the sequel to the guy that's accidentally started the apocalypse. That's
Hmm.
for sure. And we're gonna get that omnibus out this year. Those
Yeah.
are the two big. These have to happen this year.
Yeah.
I want to do more McBrides this year.
Okay.
I've actually started outlining book 7 of that. As far as how many of those I get in, time's going to be the biggest factor
Yeah.
because I have those 2 other big projects that I got to get done. I would like to get some more of those out. I don't know how many there will be. As far as bigger books go beyond this year, it's always been the idea that the guy is a trilogy,
Yeah.
and I have plot points on a document with all my details on it of where book 3 has to go and what's supposed to happen. That's probably going to be my next big project.
Mm-hmm.
I have, I don't know, a ton of projects that I've outlined a little bit on, brainstormed a little bit on. Any one of those could be the next thing after the guy. But right now, we're going to do some more McBrides. We're going to stick with the guy, and then we're going to start after that working on the next big project. What that is, I have a pretty good idea, but I can't speak to it just yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as you've probably seen in previous episodes of this show that I do, I like to end with the Pivo questionnaire, which was, of course, featured on Inside the Actors Studio, which is one of my favourite shows. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So, David, what is your favourite word?
Favorite word? Wow. That is that's stumping me. I'm gonna say today it's uh wow. This shouldn't be this hard. Let's say jump start.
Okay. What is your least favourite word?
Deadline.
What turns you on?
Um a really good meal.
What turns you off?
Having to repeat myself.
What is your favourite curse word?
Damn it.
What sound or noise do you like?
Rainstorms.
What sound or noise do you hate?
My alarm clock.
That makes 2 of us. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Profession other than mine. I wouldn't mind being a streamer, like a game streamer.
Yeah.
That sounds like it'd be fun.
Yeah, it would be. What profession other than yours would you absolutely not like to attempt?
Probably anything where I'm the test subject of something, whether that's pharmaceuticals or food, anything where we haven't worked out the details yet. I don't want to be the guinea pig.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Everything's in order and we've been waiting for you.
Excellent. Right, you can find David's work on Amazon and, of course, Audible. Keep your eyes peeled for the next books, which he will have finished this year.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I'll be on his case. David, thanks very much for being on the show. It's been a blast. I really appreciate talking to you.
Thanks for having me on, Justin. It's been a great time.
All right. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.